Welcome to the Relational Recovery podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today we're talking about discouragement. Thanks for listening, and I hope it's encouraging to you. Well, hey, Austin. I think today,
Hey, Wes.
what's up? I think today I want to talk about discouragement. Discouragement is, I think all of us find ourselves discouraged at various times. Discouragement's an emotion. I'll just read a definition to get us started. It's a feeling of despair, sadness, or lack of confidence. A discouraged person is disheartened. Three underlying causes contribute to discouragement: lack of confidence in ourselves, lack of confidence in God, lack of hope for the future. Additionally, one person wrote, because discouragement is a feeling or emotion, it can play games with our minds. We must learn how to control our minds and thus our discouragement and lean on God for strength. So, a feeling of despair, sadness, or lack of confidence. And like I said, I think this is something all of us deal with routinely from time to time, some probably more than others, and there's lots of reasons for that. But I know that in recovery and as we're trying to be relationally healthy, which just means that, we're not isolating, that there's people in our lives where we're connecting to and we're engaged in community in some degree. People aren't perfect, so people let us down, we let ourselves down, we feel like God lets us down, situations don't always go the way we want them to, and all of that, even thinking about recovery, like we can get discouraged in ourselves because we're not progressing the way that we want to progress, or we're not doing the things exactly the way that we want to do them. So all of these, I could go on and on, right? I'm sure you could as well. There's so much opportunity for discouragement in this life that it's something worth talking about, which is why we're doing it today. So that's the launching off point. I sent you over a couple thoughts or a couple screenshots before this. I'm curious where your head goes with this topic.
Yeah, it's a lot of the response that I have experienced having grown up in church and grown up in a very Christian household. A lot of the language that was used around being discouraged or being not having hope for the future was connected. I want to be clear. I grew up in the church. And this was not communicated to me by my parents. This was just the church culture I grew up in, that being discouraged or having a lack of hope in the future was directly connected to your lack of faith in God. It was like, I don't have hope in God. I don't have belief in God. I'm not believing right. And then that compounds this like, well, now I'm not even believing in God right. So like, I can't get anything. So this is just this like cyclical crazy that happens. So I think it's important to know that like when God doesn't get discouraged by us, because it's real, like it's kind of like it's like knowing the outcome of a football game, knowing who's going to win or lose, and then watching the game and know it's like, oh, I know this is going to happen. So it's a feeling of like, I know how this ends, so I don't have to feel a high emotion about it. It's like, what, to make it even more like, God doesn't watch like our lives and he's not surprised, but he enjoys seeing us succeed. And I don't think he enjoys seeing us fail. I don't think he's like, oh man, this is going to be the best. They're going to fail and I'm going to love it. Like, I don't think God thinks that way. Not the God that I talk to. I think we need to have a good relationship with how we respond to failure, because failure is necessary for life. That has to happen. We can't live a faultless life. Like you said earlier, like people are not perfect and I am a people, so I am not perfect. So I have to accept the fact that I'm going to fail. So that's what came to mind when I read through the scriptures that you sent over.
Yeah, so you're connecting discouragement to failure, and I can definitely see a correlation there. But I guess why do you connect those two right now?
Well, because I asked myself, it's like, all right, so what would be discouraging? That's within my that's within my control. Because I can be discouraged about like, I'm a big baseball fan. I love the Minnesota Twins. I grew up watching them. Because my family, I have family in Minnesota. They did not do well this year in September. It was horrible. It was really discouraging. But I can't do anything about it, so I'm not going to let that lead me to like this like deep emotion of despair or lack of hope for the future.
Having a soul crisis?
Yeah. So when I was like, so that's the first example. The next one is like, so what does discourage me? It's like, oh man, when I screw up, when I mess up, I hate when I mess up caring for my wife well, or if I don't handle a situation with my kids, or if I miss something here with work, because it's like, man, I want to be good. I want to be good at what I do. Like no one wants to walk around thinking like, man, I'm a dad, but I'm okay with being a so-so dad. Like even the ones who are not great dads, I bet it bothers them a little. At least I hope so. So that's why I went to failure, because knowing that like if I'm going to have a good relationship with discouragement and see it for the gift that it is, I have to know what is it that leads me into discouragement. We have to know what that is.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if a lot of people grew up like us, but I had a similar experience. I think that growing up around the church, I think this was in the church. I think it was also, as I think about people that didn't grow up in church, I've heard similar situations, but just an avoidance of negative emotion, avoidance of this idea that failure isn't optional. So it's like, me growing up in the church, the negative emotions weren't something that were talked about a whole lot in church. Because yeah, discouragement or doubt, things like that were seen as like you said, I mean, a very similar thing, like seen as a lack of faith, like you just need to try harder. Um,
Yeah, because that's how faith works.
yeah, which for me brought in a lot of shame, which is like this feeling like I'm not good enough. In order for people to love me, I've got to do a good job. And so discouragement might have been something I felt, but I didn't give voice to because I would just ignore it because I couldn't face the discouragement. Because to admit I was discouraged was also to admit that I wasn't a good person. And I think that we would agree today that that's not true. As hard as that might be sometimes to wrestle through, those things aren't true. Like everybody, everybody experiences discouragement. Everybody experiences doubt to some degree, and it's what we do with that. It's a sign of our need. It's a sign of our need for God and our need for community, our need for a perfect world, as we're in an imperfect one. So yeah, I relate with that because it's tough because there was such an avoidance, I think, early on in life around the negative emotions. I wonder if that plays a role then later in life because it's like, I mean, if I don't believe, like you said, if I don't believe that I can make mistakes, if making mistakes equates to being a bad person, um, mistakes then are going to be really difficult to manage as I age because any mistake is seen as like, wow, I'm no good.
Yeah, it goes from a mistake is it goes from being an action thing, like this is something I did that I can learn from, to a deep character flaw. I made this mistake
Hmm.
because I am wrong. I am bad.
Yeah,
I think we're
right.
talking like that. We talk about the difference between shame and guilt. A a mistake is like, hey, I'm guilty of doing something I shouldn't have. I'm guilty of um, I'm guilty of missing the mark. People then get discouraged when it's just like I missed the mark because there's something about me that's wrong, and I can do nothing for that. And if I can't do anything about it, I have very little hope for the future because there's no growth there.
Yeah.
So it'd be very like, and it's just kind of knowing what it is that is true.
Yeah. And I think in recovery it's hard because all of us, right? Some more extreme than others. We're all dealing with behaviors that we wish we didn't gravitate towards, but we do. And I think when people are doing things that they don't want to do, or part of them doesn't want to do, and that causes the grief, or maybe it's sinful, maybe it's like something you told your spouse you would never do again, or whatever. Or it's like a drug, like you told yourself you're never going to do it, and you told God you're never going to do it again. I think that that struggle can bring about a lot of discouragement because we lose hope. Um, we lose hope. We can go to that place of starting to despair if we're not careful. Like, oh, I'm never, like, I'm sure that people listening, and maybe you, like, I know I have been in this place where I'm like, man, I'm never gonna. We tell ourselves things like, I'm never gonna change, or I'm never gonna grow, or I'm not, I'm always gonna be like this, or whatever. And that is discouragement. That's a place of discouragement, like where we start to lose hope. And it's not a good place to be, because often that's a launching pad for like a lot, really bad thinking, poor choices.
Self-destructing behavior.
Yeah. If I did that, well, I might as well just give up, or I might as well just, you know, doesn't matter anymore. So it can lead, depending on what happened, and depending on like personality and so on, like that can go anywhere from like mild discouragement to like suicidal ideation. And yeah, we got to know what to do with our discouragement.
Yeah. So what? Yeah, this is a really good segue. So what do we do with it? Because if we're like earlier, we said that like failure is a part of life, being discouraged is part of life. So it's going to be in our lives. So what are your thoughts? Like, what do we do with this reality of what life is?
Um, well, I am in no ways am I the expert on discouragement. I deal with discouragement a lot, so I can share from just my own perspective. I think for me, I think especially as I've faced more of it, one thing that I've come to believe is like just learning not to give up. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, there's times where you need to step away from something. Maybe it's a friendship, or maybe it's a job, or maybe it's like moving to a different town. Or I'm not going to sit here and say that you never need to change something, or you never need to transition, or quitting is never a good thing. Sometimes it is, but um, but giving up on yourself is not an option. Giving up on God is not an option. Giving up on healthy relationships shouldn't be an option. So it's like whenever, because I used to, I mean, I still can do this. Thank God, not as not as toxic as it used to be, but like I used to, when I would mess up, I would just be like, I'm terrible. Like I should just quit everything. I shouldn't do anything. Like, and going into this like spiral of toxic shame. And I've come to tell myself in those moments, like, don't give up. Like, part of part of life is realizing that like this kind of pain, or this discouragement, is par for the course. That doesn't mean I should just say, "Oh, who cares? This is par for the course." But this is par for the course. I know I am imperfect. Um, Therefore, I need to stay in it. I need to stay in the fight. I need to keep being intentional. Like, I need to not give up. Um, I'm I'm looking at one of the scripture passages that was in those things I sent you earlier, Galatians 6:9. Paul writes, let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. That verse really sums up, because the church that he was writing to, like, they were not in a really easy time. And so they were facing what I would imagine to be a good amount of discouragement. And Paul gives him this word, which I think is a good word for probably all of us at different times, but don't grow weary in doing good. In other words, like, doing the right thing is hard. He's basically saying, like, yeah, you might be tired. You might be growing weary. Like, that's why he's encouraging them, don't grow weary. Why? You might ask why. He says, for in due season, you will reap if you do not lose heart. In other words, like, if, like, this will be good in the end. It may not be exactly the way you want it to be. Um, Everything, Paul doesn't say, hey, all of your wildest imaginations are going to come true if you just don't give up. But he's saying, like, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. Um, it will be good if you don't give up, if you don't lose heart. Um, and he's specifically talking about, like, obviously faith in God, but just yourself. Like, we're not going to be okay if we get to this place where we're like, I give up. It doesn't matter. Um, that's a really, oh man, my heart feels heavy thinking about it, because, like, I've been in that place, and, like, that's not a good place to be in, and I think it's a place that a lot of us can get to. And just that encouragement from Paul, like, don't grow weary in doing good. If you find yourself growing weary, just keep doing the next right thing, and trust that, like, in the end, God, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. Yeah, it might not be everything you want it to be, but it's going to be good. It's going to be way better than if you throw in the towel and just say, like, who cares? Like, it's going to be way better than that. It's going to be way better than that. So that's really the first thing that comes to mind, man. It's not really like, it's not really uh, awe inspiring or anything, but, like, I think it's just staying in it. It's like not giving up.
Yeah, there's a lot of it's like perseverance. Some of the cultural traits um, that you came up with, three cultural traits from the refuge after the core four ones, and I had them written up on my board, and then I erased them because I had them memorized. And now that I put myself on the spot, I don't want to mess this up. Is it perseverance is one of them? It's curiosity, presence, and resiliency. There it is. So resiliency. So being resilient in the face of the obstacles. So, like, and I think what we can, if we go down this road of, like, it's always going to be hard, that can be discouraged. That in and of itself can be discouraging. It's like, oh, it's always going to be hard. That's true. Something in your life is always going to be hard. That's life. But what God is pointing out in those moments is that, like, it's not that thing that's this is why there's really good quotes. It's this quote from Marcus Aurelius. It's the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. So the thing that we're struggling with, it's like, why am I struggling with this? It's like, well, I need to process through this. So here's a very lighthearted example. I wanted to be a professional baseball player when I was in middle school, like a lot of kids. And then realizing, like, man, I'm not making the all-star teams. I'm not making the travel teams. I'm not making the elite teams. And you look around, it's like, well, that's the obstacle. So I want to put more effort into it. So I'm going to try harder. I'm going to do more things. And realizing that, like, hey, like, sometimes, like, as a middle schooler, like, we've all been in middle school, and remember that, like, sometimes there's, like, seventh graders look like grown men or toddlers. And the reality is, like, hey, I hadn't grown up yet physically. So of course I wasn't going to be really good. And then I really wasn't even that good at baseball until I got to, like, my junior, senior year. And even then I wasn't the best. So the obstacle for me was realizing, like, hey, what I wanted wasn't going to happen. Not because I'm a bad person, but because, like, there's certain limits and losses that we have to accept in our lives. And that can be just like, it was like, oh, I had this dream to be a professional baseball player when I was in middle school. And then realizing, like, you know what? I met a couple of college baseball players, and they're huge. Like, I'm not very short. Like, I'm 5'10". Every college baseball player I've met is like 6'4", 280 pounds, and it's all muscle. And they're like second string, third Division 3. Like, I'm just not physically made to be a professional baseball player. But I had to process through that as at a middle school and high school to realize like I can love this game, and that's more important to me. Because what can I do? I can love this game, and I love playing it. But I'm not going to be a professional baseball player, because it'd be really discouraging if you saw a 25-year-old grown man who doesn't have the physicality to be a professional baseball player, still trying it, living in his mom's basement. I didn't do this. So it was just like those type of things, realizing like I had to go through the pain of realizing what is possible for me, and then coming out the other side, realizing what was good from that. It's like, well, I love baseball still. But that it's just changing how you're looking at something, realizing what is real. So basing what you believe in reality, because we have to anchor ourselves in reality. It's kind of like it's knowing it's like, hey, this is how things should be, but knowing how things are. So we have to base things on how things are, and then always have a hope for things to change and improve. But knowing that like some things we're talking about what is, not what should be. So there's like, and I think the way, like not giving up, having the resiliency to not give up. Because if you feel called, like we're in a Christian ministry, and many people with this language of being called is like it means we feel like God has put this ache or desire in our heart to do something with our lives, and we always want to be striving after that. And that's a drive and a will to do something. It can be very discouraging. Like Mother Teresa felt this call in her life to serve the poor in India, and it took her over a decade to get there, from when she felt this calling to when she actually got there. So she felt a calling from God for over a decade. Then she ended up doing this amazing work in the name of Jesus that people still talk about, that believers and non-believers admire, because she had the resiliency to stay and do what she knew the next right thing. And there was a lot of failures on the way. There was plenty of people who had power and authority over her saying, like, you're never going to do this. This is never going to happen. We would never help you with this. And then they did. Maybe not them, but it looked different than what she had in mind. But it turned out more beautiful because she persisted. She had resiliency to continue that good work. So, and that's a nice feel-good story. Like, there's so many other examples of what you can do when you're discouraged. So, but I don't want to I could keep going. This is failure and discouragement and how we respond to it. There's been a lot of writing, a lot of thinking on this. This is a really important topic. So we can't ignore discouragement.
Yeah, well, I wasn't even planning on going here, but you brought up a good point, and I can't tell if I feel convicted or or just like encouraged in a weird way. But like, I wonder how much ego is tied to discouragement, because you brought up the baseball analogy, and like, this is what's tough. And for anyone listening, like, just let us think through this here, because I'm thinking through this thought live on the spot. But I'm like,
This is
we
good.
don't want to tell our kids like, you can't do what you want to do. You don't want to like tell your kids that they're not going to be good at something. But at the same time, it's hard if you grow up in an environment where people tell you like you can do whatever you want, and you're the best thing ever. Because it's interesting how, like with the baseball thing, we can't settle with just being good. We have to be the best. But the hard part is there's over 7 billion people in the world, and just based on like math, there's only going to be one best. There's only going to be one best. So chances are
they only vote for one MVP every year.
Chances are you and I, like, there's always going to be somebody better, right? And if we're focused on perfection, and if we're focused on the best, we're always going to be chronically discouraged. So like, I wonder how much ego plays a role in that, because it's like the goal wouldn't be to be like, who cares? I'm not going to be the best. But why can't we aim for being good or being better or improvement? It's that whole like progress
being
over
content.
perfection. being content. But it's hard. I'll just be personal. Like for me, that's hard um, because I do love sports and because of the environment I was raised in. And I'm not blaming anybody. I think part of this is good, pushing you to be better, pushing you to be the best, pushing you to do your best work. The problem is when we start comparing and we start measuring ourselves against perfection. We start measuring ourselves against God, if you will. We're always going to come up super short. And that can lead to discouragement or it can lead to motivation to just continue to try to improve. And I think for a lot of us, that leads to a lot of discouragement. Like, man, I even see it like in ministry. It's like, oh, like you talk to pastors, they're like, well, I got to keep growing my church because I want to have the biggest church in town. They might not say that, but a lot of them think that. Or like, I want to have the best business, or I want to have the best team, or I want to have the best. And it's like, it's good to like shoot for improvement. But I wonder how much our ego gets in the way that we're setting ourselves up for discouragement. Can't we just aim for progress? And that's a word for me because that's hard. That's really hard.
I think to answer your question, how much do I think ego has to do with this? A lot, like all caps, a lot. Because it's ego is putting yourself above others and it's valuing yourself over others, over what you want, like what you want over what is good for us. And we're not designed to be solitary beings, going through life. We're designed to be together. That doesn't mean we disappear. It means I am just as important in relationships. Like I am just as equally important as the other person that's sitting across from me. So it's ego that gets out of hand can go either way. We talk about the ditches. So the middle way is knowing that like we are seeking mutual respect with each other, that we are equally important, that I have to fully show up so you can fully show up, and vice versa. There's a quote like this. I think this is a Jim and Rich ism. It's like the vulnerability of a group is limited by the person who is least vulnerable in that group. So you have to be able to show up. And the ditches on either side for ego is one side is like I don't matter at all, so why should I care? That despair side. And the other one is like I am so much more important, so much smarter, so much better. I am the expert, and everyone here is blessed to hear what I have to say. Like that. Those are the extremes of ego. So what if we're talking about how much ego gets in the way of us being like allowing us to process through obstacles? It's a ton. Because if we're able to have a healthy ego, meaning like a healthy self, knowing that I am like this, a technical term is self-differentiation, which means I know when I start and I know when I end and you begin. So like what you do will affect me, but it doesn't control who I am. Like I'm not a robot. You're not a robot. I can't say Western, like you're going to do this. Like that's just not how we work. You get to choose whether we agree or not. I get to choose whether we agree or not. So that's self-differentiation. So having that, knowing that like who I am is important, is just as important as who this other person is. So that's like, so when we lose sight of that, of course we're going to be discouraged when we put all this effort in and then things outside of our control ruin it. But we cannot control the outcome of pretty much everything. We can control the effort we put into it. And that I'm saying all this because it leads me back to what you said earlier on of like, do we do good things? Cause like, I think we need to do good things because we believe they're good, not because of a hope for like a bigger house or a nicer car. Even though those two things are nice, like everybody wants a nicer house and a nicer car. That'd be great. But do we do good things just because we hope people would see us as good? Because that's exhausting and will lead to a lot of discouragement and failure. Or do we do good things because we believe they're good?
Yeah, maybe to put it a different way.
Because that's the goodness.
Maybe to put it a different way, but I really like the point you're making. Where my mind goes is it's like It's not like you brought up the house, the car, whatever. Like wanting things. I mean, again, like we can want things too much to where that's all we care about. That's not good. But like you said, like wanting a house or a car, like isn't inherently bad. But it's a really bad ultimate aim. In other words, like like what I'm hearing you say is it's like the purpose of my existence needs to be on something like bigger. It's like, cause it's like it's like my entire aim being on being happy. It's like if I'm chasing happiness, that is fleeting. It's like, but if I find myself happy, that's good. Like, it's good to be happy. But if everything I'm doing is to try to make myself happy, like I'm never like it's like chasing after wind. It's not going to happen. So it's like if I'm doing all this to be celebrated, or if I'm doing all this to be the best, or if I'm doing all this to just have nicer stuff, to your point, like there's always going to be, because I can't control the outcomes, like you said, um, I'm always going to be left wanting. So it's like, that's not to say that wanting certain things isn't bad, but it's like, is my ultimate aim to do good, and why? Is it to honor God? Is it to grow as a person? Is it to learn? Is it, and so it's like having more altruistic, I think, like higher aims is going to be better, because to your point, like often we can't control outcomes. We can only control, like you said, effort, you know? Um, I mean, I'm growing in this a little. I wish that when things don't go great, I could focus more on what I learned and how I grew, rather than, oh, this didn't go the way I wanted it to. It didn't go exactly the way I wanted it to, you know?
Yeah, that is a difficult practice. When things go sideways, like we talk about, like life is full of crap hitting the fan, and for us, like something that I really like been hanging my my inner monologue on is, it's not what happens to me, but my reaction in what matters. My reaction to what happened. That's what matters. So because I can't control what happens to me, right? It's just kind of like, it rains today. Like I can't control that. I could either be mad about it, or I can be like, oh, it rained. I'm gonna, thank goodness I always have an umbrella. So it's just like one of those where, uh, and then when I do get abnormally frustrated about something, asking the question, like, why am I so upset? Like, why did it make me feel this way? Like, what is going on in there that makes me respond with such anger or such rage, or like complete confusion? Like, what is it about this? So it's wanting that, having an attitude of curiosity really helps. But in the moment when something really bad happens, I mean, like, man, I'm working to give myself just a little bit of a break when something bad happens, and then it's like, man, I didn't respond the way I wanted to. I sounded like an idiot, or I rambled, or like, yeah, in the moment, like emotions get really heightened, and like the only way to get better at handling yourself in high stress situations is being in high stress situations and learning to build that muscle. And so, not like, it's like when you do something for the first time, it's really awkward. It doesn't look the way you want. But having those like learning type questions that we ask ourselves, because we ask ourselves questions all the time. Why didn't I do that? Will I ever get better? Will I ever change? Will I ever improve? Those are all questions, and we're just asking them all the time. It's shifting them from that kind of like this is from a book. This is a switching from judger questions to learner questions. So what am I learning from this? Like, what about this process is helpful? What about this do I want to remember? What about, how is this different? How have I improved? So what am I, it's the easiest one's like, what am I learning from this? And it could be, it's like, man, people suck. I'm like, that's kind of flippant. It's like, not everybody sucks. So it's, again, anchoring ourselves in reality. What is true? It's like, there are good people today. There are good people in our lives. And like, we have to remember those times when stuff gets difficult, when we are discouraged, not if, when we are discouraged, because we will be.
It's good, man. Well, gone over 30 minutes. I think I just want to end with this passage in Philippians, right at the beginning, chapter 1, verse 6, where Paul writes, being confident of this very thing, he who began a good work in you will complete it until the day of Christ. And I think the encouragement there is God doesn't give up on us. And no matter what's happening, God doesn't give up on us. And I think the challenge for us oftentimes is not to give up on God and not to give up on ourselves and not to give up on the people that love us. So if you're discouraged today, I hope that you find at least a little bit of encouragement in Paul's words. I'll read it again, being confident of this very thing. So he's encouraging them to be confident. This is how he opens his letter. He who began a good work in you will complete it until the day of Christ. None of us are perfect. I think if we aim towards progress, not perfection. I need to hear that, and just know that God is at work, even when sometimes it doesn't look like it, even when sometimes you find yourself discouraged. So that's what I want to leave you with. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.